morning, everyone. For those who haven't met yet, I'm Stephanie Tuning. I am the education coordinator here at 100 Miles, and we're very excited to see all of your faces. This is our first in-person Naturalist 101 lecture since February of 2020. So can I say I'm very excited to be back in person and happy that you're all here tonight. The other big thing we're excited about is this is also our first program for our 10th anniversary. 100 Miles is celebrating our 10th anniversary this year. So we're celebrating, we're educating, but we're still working hard to help protect this coast that we all love so much. So tonight we are starting off with our legislative priorities of this year. So at the heart of our organization is fighting and protecting and our advocates and the hard work they do. So we're going to hear about our legislative priorities tonight, as well as from other our other advocates about some of the work that we're working on this year. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Megan DeRosiers, who is our CEO and president of our organization and head educator.
Thank you for coming. I'm so excited. It's so nice to be outside and with people and eating and drinking, so thank you for being here. My name is Megan, as Stephanie said, and I know many of you, but I don't know many of you, so I'm glad you came out. Alice, who is my colleague, she and I founded 100 Miles 10 years ago. And the whole story behind 100 Miles is that we needed an organization that could help people advocate for our coast. So most advocacy groups advocate for our coast or advocate for something. We help you advocate for something, and you help us advocate for it as well. And so the way that we approach our legislative priorities or our local priorities is that we try and connect the voices of the people who care about our coast with the decision makers who are making decisions that affect it. And so we're going to talk to you tonight about 3 issues, and I'm going to start with one, then Alice, and then a colleague of ours who is also working on a legislative priority couldn't be here tonight, Jennifer Hilburn, and so I'm going to tell you what she was going to say. So the first issue that I want to talk about, you probably know that the main threats to Georgia's 100-mile coast are sea level rise and development. And one of the most important tools that we have for helping us protect our coast from sea level rise is our salt marsh. That's also one of our most iconic elements of our landscape is our salt marsh. When you think about the Georgia coast, you think about salt marsh. And we all know that that's because 50 years ago, in 1970, our Georgia legislators passed the Salt Marsh Protection Act, which is a landmark piece of legislation on the East Coast that prevents anybody from filling wetlands, from mining the salt marsh, or doing anything to alter the salt marsh. Of course, we have the Army Corps of Engineers and we have other governing bodies, but for the most part, our landmark legislation, the Salt Marsh Protection Act, is why you see the salt marsh and the vast miles and miles of it that we have today. And it's also the reason, because Florida and South Carolina don't have that same legislation, that you don't see salt marsh like that across the border in Florida or South Carolina. So what the Salt Marsh Protection Act did was, and what the public trust doctrine does, is it says that the salt marsh belongs to the people, unless you can prove that you own it. And the only way that you can prove that you own salt marsh is if the King of England gave you a grant or gave somebody a grant, and you still have that grant, and you have kept the conditions of that grant intact for hundreds and hundreds of years. And believe it or not, there are still people who own what is called a crown or a king's grant, and they own the salt marsh. And so that is salt marsh that the state of Georgia does not own. In addition to the people that currently own that salt marsh that have proven that they own it, there are a handful of other people who claim that they own the salt marsh. And so they are working through a process with the Attorney General's office to help verify whether or not they own that salt marsh. And until they can prove that they own it, that they've met all the conditions of the King's Grant, which the King's Grant, the King of England gave these stipulations, some of them were like, you can own this salt marsh as long as you uphold the condition that every member of your family serves in the military from now and forevermore, or every firstborn son, or like every King's grant has a different set of conditions associated with it. And so they have to prove that they've met those conditions. And if they've met them, then they own the salt marsh. But if they haven't met them, then the state of Georgia owns the salt marsh. Now you can imagine the Attorney General's office, which is the office that is responsible for verifying who owns the salt marsh, has to go through tons and tons and tons of documents and research and verification and ground truthing, and to figure out if a claim to salt marsh is legitimate or if it's not. Well, it can take years. So last year in the legislature, a bill was introduced to bypass that process, and essentially it would have required that the Attorney General's office be limited to 60 days to do that review. And if it didn't do the review in 60 days, then the salt marsh automatically got turned over to the private entity that was claiming ownership. And so essentially it was a way to basically give out salt marsh. Now some of these claims are legitimate, but some of them may not be, and so it is the state of Georgia's responsibility to do the research and protect the state's ownership and the people's ownership of the salt marsh. So that's a great example of a bill that came up that we didn't know about ahead of time, that because we were there, because of the position that we had in the legislature, we were able to block from passing before the end of the session. And we actually used our advocacy network to help educate people about that bad bill and to get people to communicate with their legislators about it. And not only did we have people sending emails to their legislators about it, but we lined up Zoom meetings with lawyers who were experts in Crown grants. We set up Zoom meetings with and legislators. We set up Zoom meetings with owners of Crown grants who thought that this bill was a bad idea, to help educate the legislators about how this bill and why this bill wouldn't be a good thing for Georgia salt marsh and for the people of Georgia. And so as we think about these legislative priorities that we're talking about tonight, I want you to think about that that's what we do. We don't just go to Atlanta and advocate, but we help connect the people who live here and love this place to the decisions being made, like I said earlier. And the legislative session is 40 days long. So it started last Monday and it'll end by the beginning of April. And so every week we'll be up there and you'll be getting information from us about what's going on. We expect that bill to come back this year. It's possible that it will. It's likely that it will. And so we'll keep you informed about it. But, just like I'm telling you this, I'm seeing a lot of you nod or shake your heads. These are issues that a lot of people don't know anything about. Like, how many of you knew about Crown grants and about the process? And so it's really important, like you are doing tonight, to pay attention and to learn and to try and figure out, because the decisions that are being made, even the legislators don't know all the important details. And sometimes, because it's only 40 days, even the experts don't know what's going on before it's too late, before the decision has already been made. And so that's the value that we hope to bring to the coast, to the state of Georgia, to the resources that we're working to protect. And so we decided that we were going to take questions after each issue, and I wonder if you have any questions about that one issue. Thank you. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Alice.
Hey, everybody. Oh, hey, Megan. As Megan mentioned, my name is Alice Miller-Keyes, and I'm the Vice President of Coastal Conservation with 100 Miles. It's such a pleasure to be here with you tonight. And as Stephanie said, it's been 3 years since we've been able to get together, but we're here really launching our 10-year celebration. So thank y'all for being here. So one of our legislative priorities is going to take us about 60 miles to the southwest of where we are right now. And so I want to know, has anybody here been to the Okefenokee Swamp? Excellent. Awesome. Okay. Well, the Okefenokee Swamp is one of North America's greatest treasures. It sits at about 440,000 acres. grab my map. The Okefenokee is one. No, you don't. Thanks. We've been working together for 10 years. I've been a wife. No. So the very first time I went to the Okefenokee, I was blown away by the massive landscape that was before me and didn't see any people there at all. But what was most stunning to me was the noises. We heard sandhill cranes, barred owls, frogs, toads, everything. It was amazing. And we were able to camp on one of the platforms in the middle of the swamp. So if you haven't had a chance to do that, I highly recommend it. But the Okefenokee is truly a national treasure. Again, it's at 440,000 acres. About 400,000 acres of that is in wilderness. And so you're not allowed to put, major structures or roads or things like that through it. The St. Mary's River, that is just, exits into the Cumberland Sound at St. Mary's, starts in the Okefenokee Swamp. And it drains the bottom southeastern corner of the Okefenokee. So most of the swamp is drained through the Suwannee River, and it goes down, this way down through Florida. And so you think about the Suwannee and you associate it with the Okefenokee, but the St. Mary's is quite significant. And one of the most significant things about this is that the St. Mary's cuts right through this amazing formation called Trail Ridge. Trail Ridge is about 120 miles long from the Altamaha River all the way down south of Stark, Florida. And so it's a really high elevation ridge, kind of like Silver Bluff. Right. So it's a former geologic formation that was the coast of the state of Georgia. And it sits at a high elevation, about 120 feet above sea level, compared to where we are right now at about 7 to 10 feet above sea level. 5 in some places in downtown Brunswick, 5. But the Trail Ridge forms the eastern boundary of the swamp. And again, the very first time I came to the Okefenokee Swamp, I truly thought this was a man-made railroad line. That it was this long, because there's a road that travels this way, and then you can see this, high elevation. But it is a natural formation that basically forms the eastern boundary of the Okefenokee Swamp. And, okay, is that enough visual for Vanna here? Can Vanna sit down? Okay, so one of the cool things about the Trail Ridge formation is that it's a heavy mineral, it's rich in heavy mineral sands. And so titanium, zirconium, those types of minerals are found along the Trail Ridge Formation. So you have a lot of mining interests that are really focused on Trail Ridge. And there's a lot of mining that's actually happening along sections of the Trail Ridge. Up near Nehunta, you have Mission Mine that Chemours runs. Down in Stark, Florida, if y'all have ever driven out, through Jacksonville and headed out west on I-10, you can see the landscape that's really heavily mined. Those are for heavy mineral sands that are used in a lot of different things, from food products to cell phone components. And so the mining interest has been prevalent for a while. Back in 1990s, there was a company, some of y'all might remember this, the DuPont company came and wanted to mine along Trail Ridge for some heavy mineral sands. But because the area that they wanted to mine was so close to the Okefenokee Swamp, there was such public outcry that DuPont basically abandoned their plans, and that area was turned over as a conservation preserve. And so that's permanently protected. Unfortunately, in 2018, we found out about a company called a company called Twin Pines out of Alabama that has proposed to mine heavy mineral sands right next door to the Okefenokee Swamp. And there has been amazing public outcry, the same way that there has been against DuPont. Unfortunately, that company has continued their pursuit to mine for heavy mineral sands next to the Okefenokee. And some of the biggest concerns around it are really related to the hydrology of the area. And so again, Trail Ridge sits at a pretty high elevation, about 120 feet above sea level, whereas the St. Mary's River, drops down really quickly as it passes through Trail Ridge and then drops down to the city of St. Mary's and out into the Atlantic Ocean. that elevation change is quite significant. And again, it's like a hydrologic dam, Trail Ridge is. But Twin Pines wants to dig down 50 feet into Trail Ridge, pull up all of the sediments, process it, and then put it back. The problem is that Trail Ridge is really diverse. It's got a lot of different layers of sands and clays and different sediments. And so once you dig all that stuff up, there's no putting it back the way that it used to be. And so there's no promise that that hydrologic dam that exists right now would be intact after you dig it up and put it back. And so 100 Miles has been part of a huge coalition of national, state, and local groups that have been opposing Twin Pines getting permission to mine next door to Okefenokee since 2018. And we continue that fight. And there's been some back and forth, some flip-flopping around who has jurisdiction over managing the impact to wetlands that a mine would cause. When President Trump was in office, he changed some of the Clean Water Act that basically eliminated all federal jurisdiction from the wetlands that are found along this 8,000 acres of area that Twin Pines wanted to mine. And so then that turned over the responsibility to the state alone to permit any activities that would have impact the waters of the state. Megan mentioned the marshlands being waters of the state. Well, freshwater wetlands are also waters of the state that have federal and state protections. There's been some flip-flopping, and the EPA was able to reinstate for a time their jurisdiction, and then Twin Pines filed a lawsuit, and then that decision was reversed. So now we're finding ourselves back in a place where it's only up to the state of Georgia to issue the permissions needed to dig, a 700-acre mine next door to the Okefenokee Swamp. And so what we're finding is that the interest in mining along Trail Ridge has not diminished, but the responsibility for protecting the Okefenokee Swamp now lies solely with the state of Georgia. And the good news is that we have two areas where we as citizens, can really have an impact right now. There is being introduced this legislative session, the Okefenokee Protection Act, which will prohibit the Environmental Protection Agency from issuing any surface mining permits to companies that are interested in mining that little stretch, next to the Okefenokee. It wouldn't have any impact on the existing mines. It wouldn't have any impact on areas of Trail Ridge beyond the Okefenokee. And so it basically is the Okefenokee Protection Act. And so we need people to write to the legislators to ask them to support this Okefenokee Protection Act. It was introduced last year but failed to get introduced in committee, which was unfortunate, but we have a lot of hope that this is our year for the state to step up and to protect the Okefenokee. The other area where we really need citizen engagement is that just yesterday, the Environmental Protection Agency, who is responsible for issuing the permits, announced that they were accepting public comments on a surface mine land use plan. It's not the permit, but it's a plan. And so we just kind of have to stay vigilant and keep flooding the Environmental Protection Agency with our opposition to why would you even consider a plan if you know that mining along this Trail Ridge is terrible. Sorry, EPD, the Environmental Protection Division, not the agency. Thank you, Megan. So those are the two areas where we really have an opportunity to show that we as Georgians really support the Okefenokee, and that we don't want any activities that would be a detriment to the livelihood of the people that live and recreate in that area, and to this international treasure that sits in our backyard. So again, stay tuned for more information about how you can email your legislators. Actually, you can text. If you're inclined to text, you can text SWAMP to the number 52886, and it'll pull up a whole tool that you can use to email your legislators right now. But that's a very high priority that 100 Miles has. The members of the Georgia Water Coalition is a very high priority for the Water Coalition members and our national and local partners as well. So. Yeah, so that number again, text 52886, text the word swamp to that number, and it'll pull up a little tool. Yes?
What do our newly elected representatives and state senators, what's their position?
Megan, Phil asked about our newly elected Senator Hodges and where his position is.
So we're in full-on battling Twin Pines lobbyists mode right now. Legislative session started last Monday. They had 4 days in session last week, and they have 0 days in session this week because they're working on the budget. But the lobbyists are at the Capitol, and the word is out that this bill is going to be introduced. And so, just to be clear, the permit with the EPD is one thing, and that deals with the Twin Pines mine. But the bill would prevent future mining, including a future expansion of the Twin Pines mine that has already been approved. So the bill would not prevent the mine that EPD is considering, but it would prevent an expansion of that mine. And so Twin Pines lobbyists are in the ears of the legislators currently saying, well, you know, you need to compensate the property owners for the property rights that you're going to be taking with this legislation, and you need to, this is going to prevent existing mines from existing, and all these things, which all of those things aren't true. And so this week, Senator Hodges was talking about, the idea of compensating landowners, and others were talking about the same thing. And so we have a lot of education to do with the legislators, but I will say that Representative Darlene Taylor has a bill. She has the language. It's come out of Legislative Council. She has it in her hand, and she is shopping it around, walking around to legislators and getting signatures on the bill. And on Monday, she says, hopefully, cross your fingers, that she's going to go to the well on the floor of the House and say, anybody who wants to sign this bill, come sign it right now, which means that they would be a sponsor of the bill. Last year, there were 19 Republican and Democrat sponsors of the bill, so it was a great bipartisan effort, and she hopes to file it Monday afternoon. That's what she's saying. Of our local legislators here, I don't know any of them who are going to sign it, but of our coastal legislators up and down the coast, Representative Ron Stevens and Representative Al Williams are both interested and willing to sign it. Jesse Petrie is interested in signing it. They're all from like the Savannah and Liberty County area. Now Stephen Sains from Camden, he's not interested in signing. Who am I forgetting? John Corbett is from the area of the mine, Charlton County. He's not interested in signing it either. So, I mean, it's definitely getting support from across the state. It's because it's an issue of jobs versus environmental. I mean, it's not an issue of that, but that's how Twin Pines lobbyists are pitching it. There's a little bit of a, difficulty there.
I just wanted to add one bit of clarification that I don't think I was very clear on. Megan mentioned that the mine that is currently being considered right now is being called a demonstration mine because they don't want to say that we're committed to mining 8,000 acres, which is right down here in this southeastern corner of the swamp area. But the demonstration mine that's being discussed right now and is they're requesting permission to dig into is only 760 acres. And so it would be part of the 8,000 acres that they currently own. But as Megan said, if this bill passes, they would be, even if they get the permit to mine 760 acres, they would not be able to expand, which makes it kind of financially unsound for a company. Not viable. We've been working together for 10 years. Yes, so I just wanted to clarify that. Yes, ma'am. Twin Pines is, the president of Twin Pines is a guy named Steve Engel, and they're an Alabama-based company that has ties to other industrial corporations. there's an industry up here in Madison, Georgia, that Steve Engel and Twin Pines have been tied to, that actually went in and burned creosote railroad ties and totally polluted the community and the creeks in and around their industrial site. And so they're kind of a bad actor. They also have a bad reputation down in the Stark area. They're managing a mine down there where they have violated quite a few Clean Water Act regulations. And so they have disassociated themselves with those activities and said, oh no, we're just Twin Pines, but it's just a matter of semantics. The actors are still there, and they're still, not trustworthy right now. So, and I have documentation if you're interested in seeing that. Any other questions about the Okefenokee? And yes, ma'am.
Have you seen Sacred Waters? The Okefenokee and Carol?
Yes.
What's it?
Miss Carolyn asked if we had seen Sacred Waters. It's a documentary that was done and is available online right now through protectokefenokee.org. So it's linked on our website, but if you want to take a sign with you, you can go to okefenokee.org and put it in your yard and encourage all your neighbors to watch the show too. But Sacred Waters is a beautifully well done documentary about the Okefenokee and about the people that love and really identify with the swamp itself and live there and really want to see it protected for their children and grandchildren.
Well, thank you all again for coming out this evening. And again, if you have questions, feel free to ask us afterwards. We will be sending a follow-up email with the two different things that the ladies mentioned this evening. I also want to give a big shout out, a thank you to our members. Because of your membership dollars, it allows us to do these programs and to continue doing our programs throughout the year. So thank you to our members. Also, our next Naturalist 101 lecture is February 16th, and it will be in our new office at 7 Glen Avenue. We are now right there on 17. After McDonald's and before you turn to come down here. So we're the small building setback, but we're 7 Glen, and we'll host our first lecture there with Tony Martin, and he'll be talking about the geology of the Georgia coast. So we're looking forward to that. We will send a link to that also in our follow-up email. And then if Alice has inspired you to go to the Okefenokee, we have a few spots left for our trip a week from tomorrow. 27th, thank you, that's why Katie's here. 27th, and we're taking a sunset boat ride. So we'll start before the sun sets, we'll go out into the swamp and watch the sunset and then come back in the dark. And if you've never done this, it's pretty spectacular and a really fun way to see the swamp. So we have a couple more spots, and you can sign up on our website. So thank you all again for coming out. We're not going, oh, yes?
I would like to ask permission to trade a question for a statement.
Okay, what was your statement?
May I have
I'm nervous.
It's the worst thing that you could ever do is to hand me a microphone. I'm Starling Sutton, and I just want to say something about the effectiveness of 100 miles lobbying. I had until the 95, 96, for 25 years, I did lobbying, both local in Atlanta, state, and national. And I think it was a couple of years ago, Megan, that I had an opportunity to go up with you and some other people to lobby and speak and smile and shake hands with the legislators. And I had the good fortune of being with Megan all that day with the legislators. I have never been so impressed with a lobbyist. What makes a lobbyist good is their knowledge. A silver tongue helps sometimes and other things, but knowledge is really what does it. And I want you to know that when Megan and Alice and others go up to lobby our legislators, they just don't go in and push, These legislators depend on Megan and 100 Miles most often to teach them, to educate them about the legislation that's in front of them, what it will do, what it won't do, and what the effects are. And the beautiful thing about it is that these legislators know that 100 Miles personnel, Megan, Alice, Stephanie, they are not going to tell them something that is not true. And they're not just going to sit there and push for one side. They are going to give them the truth and the facts on both sides. And I just think it's wonderful, and that you are supporting a group that is doing a damn good job.
Well, on that lovely note, well, thank you so much. Well, feel free to get another beer, and we're going to be here for another moment. But thank you all for coming out tonight, and we hope to see you again soon at another program. Thanks.